the support. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Crystal to introduce us and get us rolling.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Hey, everyone. Thank you all for being able to join us today. The conversation is going to be really, really great. So I'm so excited for you. But before we dive deep into it, I do want to introduce our moderator for today. It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce you to Miss Anna Lean. I've known Anna for about 5 years now. Doesn't feel like it's been that long, but it has. I was at my first entry-level position where I met Anna, and even up until this day, Anna has been a guiding light, if you will, a mentor. She has shown me just the ropes of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so through various projects, including this one, it has been great to work with you. But more about her. She is the Director of Partnerships for AdColor, as well as the President of AAF here in Austin. She's been in advertising for over 18 years, and she has a passion for diversity and inclusion, which is another reason why we all were able to bring her here today to moderate. But she was born in Mexico City, and she has taken just her cultural experience with her throughout her career. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you to Miss Anna Lean.
Thank you, Crystal. You're right, it doesn't feel like 5 years, but I'm excited to see you here in the industry thriving, and I'm excited to be moderating this panel with these amazing people. I watch and moderate various panels, and I have to brag about these people in particular because they're pretty awesome. So let me tell you a little bit about them. We've got Jay Chappell, and Jay is a quality analyst at Indeed.com. She has been instrumental in advocating underrepresented groups and speaking, about intersectionality. She's no stranger to panels because she often travels with Indeed to assist with their D&I initiatives and speaks at events and helps with recruiting. So she's able to bring a really interesting perspective as we talk about the workforce and where we are with diversity. So thank you, Jay. We also have Nina Howe, and this woman is very busy. She does a lot, but everything she does is really about providing a platform for diverse voices, whether it's her role as assistant director with the Launchpad at UT that gives students of all backgrounds the opportunity to explore entrepreneurship, whether as her role as founder of Collective Blue, a lifestyle brand that celebrates diverse creators, or as co-founder of Misfits Productions, which is an event series for Asian American women in entrepreneurship and the arts. Always making sure that these voices are heard and amplified. So thank you, Nina, for joining us. We also have Donovan Triplett. He is a senior strategist at McGarrett Jesse, whose goal is really to find the truth and make it compelling in his role there. He has really worked hard to push forward the DE&I efforts at his agency and is also an advisory board member for AdColor. Then we have Michael Ward, and Michael is president and CEO of Austin Urban Technology Movement, a social entrepreneur focusing on technology, business, and socioeconomic development. He started out at Oracle, where he led the Black Employee Resource Group, and then transitioned to ADP, where he really learned the importance of human capital and the impact it has on a company's success. So excited to have Michael here to talk about the tech side of it all. And we have another panelist who will be joining us in progress, Kuria Francis, and I'll tell you a little bit about her while she's not here yet. She is an often sought out speaker, which is why we were excited to have her on our panel. She's spoken at the 3% conference, at the Texas Diversity Council. She is a UT grad for all you UT students out there. She has 3 degrees, so top that. And after years of advocating for diverse voices and experiences in her various roles on the agency side, she is VP of Diversity and Inclusion at GSE&M. She is also a close friend of mine and outgoing president of AAF Austin. So when Kuria gets here, you know all about her. So we're about to dive into this conversation about diversity and inclusion, and I would be really tone deaf not to talk a little bit at the beginning about some of the stuff that's going on, because I'm sure it's a little bit top of mind for everybody. Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Christian Cooper, these are things that are happening around us, and just want to make sure that you guys feel like this is a space where if that's something you want to talk about, you can, because oftentimes those things are happening and we're talking about DE&I in our workplaces, and we forget that those topics are always running in the background and they may be impacting how we're feeling and the things we want to talk about. So let's talk about that world. So let's start with how you got into your roles, because a lot of the audience here are students. And I want to talk to you a little bit, Michael, because your role isn't necessarily creative or advertising, it's tech, and it's an industry where people of color are very much underrepresented. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to break into your industry?
Sure. Thank you for that question. And I always have to give a shout out to my advisor when I first was in my freshman and sophomore year in college. My advisor actually pushed me to go to college outside of Florida. So I'm originally from Miami, but she recommended me to go to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So I packed my bags, 20 years old in Miami, drove up to North Carolina. And when I went to UNC, that's when I really got exposed just to different opportunities. At the time, I was pursuing going to the Peace Corps. I was also pursuing becoming a financial advisor at Edward Jones. However, a recruiter reached out to me on LinkedIn, and she said, "Hey, have you ever thought about Oracle?" And I was like, "Oracle, what is that?" Mind you, I went to a great school. I got into UNC, so from an education standpoint, I was pretty okay. But I didn't know about Oracle. I didn't know about the industry. I didn't really even think about that. But the moment she reached out, that's when I started doing some more research. And I was like, okay, so there's a whole new industry out there that I haven't really been exposed to. Yes, I knew about computers. I played a PlayStation. That was definitely my forte. But I didn't really think about technology above that. I didn't think about how we could really leverage smartphones and what that'll look like when we dive into computers or leveraging for the cloud. So because that recruiter who reached out to me, that really opened up the doors, which allowed me to then dive deep into the tech industry. And now, given the fact that it took me about 21 years of my life in order to understand the tech industry, now through all the work that we do through Autumn, which is Austin Urban Technology Movement, we want to reach people younger. We want to reach people sooner. We want to expose them to what the tech industry really means, and not on a level 1 level where we're talking about internet access and access to devices, but understanding those devices, how to leverage those devices, how can we create new devices or new opportunities within the tech industry that we even haven't discussed yet. And in order for us to do that, we really have to reach people younger, but then at the same time connect them with other people doing great work in this field.
Very cool. And Donovan, from an advertising standpoint, you're young and up and coming strategist here in the industry. How did you find advertising?
Yeah, so it happened a little bit by happenstance. Originally, I had coming into college not really knowing what I wanted to do. I was like, oh, I'll do marketing, but then knew I didn't really want to be in the business college, and sort of saw advertising is similar, but not in that college. And it was literally just as simple as that. But in terms of how I ultimately ended up breaking in the industry, a lot of it had to do with making connections, but also following up. I think sort of the recycled wisdom is always like, it's not your net worth, it's your network, and all of that, and making sure you're making these connections and talking with people. And I think a lot of students do that, but I think how far you get ultimately in a lot of ways comes down to how good you are at following up and following through. So with me specifically, I had a professor who looked out and introduced me to this program called MAPE, which if anyone doesn't know, is the Multicultural Advertising Internship Program that places multicultural students in internships around the country at all of the best agencies. And so it was something I hadn't heard about. He let me know about it, and immediately just like went, filled out the application, followed up with him about recommendations, was able to get that. And I think that's kind of been a theme throughout every pivot and every entrance. I like had an internship up in New York, and one person sort of, I was the only Black intern out of 30. And he, a Black man, kind of looked out for me and kind of made himself available. But from that point forward, we were having lunch, we were doing this. He was introducing me to people, I was following up with them. And I think that's been a kind of a through line throughout everything is you know, meet people, and I think people innately want to help. They just don't always know how, or don't always have the time to. And so just being persistent, and if someone offers that help, to follow up and take it.
Great. And I know, Jay, you talk a lot about networking and this idea of connecting with people that can kind of help you along the way, and especially people who have similar backgrounds or look like you. What can students and people who are kind of finding their way in their career do to find those networks, to find people like that?
Yeah, a little bit of what I did was attending networking events, or right now, like attending virtual events, and just like making a note of who's speaking and what they're talking about, and then following up with them on LinkedIn, or if they have like an Instagram or Twitter page. It's like, it's very similar to what Donovan said. Like, a lot of people do want to help, they don't know how. So if you do your due diligence and follow up, like, hey, you talked about this on the panel, I just want to connect with you because I'm interested in blah, blah, blah. And that way, even if they can't help you, 9 times out of 10, they may know someone who can.
Yeah, that's great. Nina, I know that in the Asian American community and at UT, for some of those students that maybe don't feel like all the conversations are about them, how have you made an impact in diversity, equity, and inclusion in your role, both at UT and in your other efforts?
Yeah, so I actually studied advertising in my undergrad when I went to UT, but I never went the ad agency life. I think I took those skill sets and pursued the startup world, which I thought was just really engaging and appealed to me in a different way. But I think my advertising background was so substantial in helping me to thrive in those spaces. I think even starting, well, when I was at UT, I felt like this conversation around entrepreneurship wasn't really geared towards me, especially, I mean, I was studying advertising. I wasn't in the business school.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a minority, you know, immigrant, female, all the check boxes, right? And at that time, I felt like access to entrepreneurship education was geared more towards, you know, STEM and business students, generally, you know, like white men.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in my undergrad years, I pushed a lot to get new programs developed, from Social Innovation Challenge on campus to supporting the launch of the Longhorn Entrepreneurship Agency, to a student-led startup fund. So, you know, that kind of got my feet wet. And then now in my full-time job, I'm able to go loop back around and get paid to do the work I was doing for free.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I'm even more passionate about reaching out to, you know, the communication school, to the liberal arts college, you know, accessing minority groups and letting them know that entrepreneurship is a resource for them. I mean, at UT, our Black student population is 4%, which is terrible.
Yeah.
So I'm really proud of how much higher that number is for our programs moving forward.
I really love what you said about, you said, build what you like to see in the world. And I think that's a really cool idea. Just you kind of built your own job. So that's awesome. Kuria, we already told everybody how awesome you are. But one thing I didn't mention was the fact that you kind of single-handedly built this custom program to do D&I at GSD&M, and the importance of it being everybody's responsibility. And I'd love for you, because you have, you know, many years of experience, whether it was your official role or not, to talk a little bit about the misconceptions of DE&I and kind of where we've been and where we are now.
Yeah, well, first of all, I actually was on as a attendee. So thank you, Anna, for a beautiful introduction. So I actually heard it. Thank you.
Excellent. You're welcome.
It's kind of nice to hear when people talk behind your back and it actually is positive. So thank you for that. Yes, you're absolutely right, Anna. You actually took the class as well. We did a small group 8-hour diversity and inclusion training, and we covered everything. We covered race, bias, ethnicities, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, anything you can think of, we covered it. And it was really just an introduction. We scratched the surface. But what I think a lot of people feel when they think about diversity and inclusion is that it doesn't include white males, white straight males specifically. And the truth of the matter is that we're in a part, or especially now after the pandemic, we're in a part of our society cycle, if you will, where people need to bond together and create allyship. You know, I always say, you know, we have a term saying preaching to the choir. And what that really means is you're talking to yourself and you're talking to people who are in the exact same position you are. And the only key to making any program go forward is to bring someone who has the privilege and in some cases the power to be able to move that efforts forward. So all the things that Jay and Donovan and Nina and Michael had spoken about, I really hope that people take note, because there's so many people who listen to these panels. Don't take note, just listen. Don't take anything away from it. It's the people who really understand that this is a nugget that other people don't get, and taking advantage of that nugget, that you actually are able to propel your vision or your career forward.
Yeah, and I, you know, I was listening. I was telling the panelists earlier that I was listening to the Adweek Diversity and Inclusion Summit earlier this afternoon. I don't know if you were on it, but
it's funny. I had technical difficulties all day so
oh,
on my personal computer.
Well, then you may have missed it. But Mark, oh darn. Okay, Mark Pritchard, CMO of P&G. Amazing guy. He was on the summit and was talking about COVID kind of being this amazing opportunity. We keep talking about this idea of a fresh start, of going back to a new normal, not normal, and what that new normal could look like. And he said something that I thought was awesome. He talked about restarting equal. Like, this is the opportunity. Like, if a lot of people have had layoffs and furloughs and whatnot, and this is the opportunity for these agencies and these organizations, when they start hiring again, this is an opportunity to do it differently. Do you guys see in your organizations that DE&I efforts are becoming less of a priority, more of a priority? Do you see kind of a hunger to restart fresh and have this be a new opportunity? And yeah, go ahead, Korea.
I was going to say, I'll just add and then let everybody else speak,
Yeah.
Which is basically there are two parts to that. The truth of the matter is we are trying to find money wherever you can find it. And so sometimes diversity, equity, inclusion fall into the nice to have and not need to have, when we actually know it's a need to have. But on the flip side of that, we are no longer, speaking for GSD&M, are no longer landlocked. We could only get talent that was interested in moving to Austin, right, or possibly Chicago. We have a Chicago office. And we were only limited to people who were like, in a certain life stage. So if their wife or their husband had a job, then they couldn't move and all that kind of stuff. So now we're no longer landlocked. So I think that people who are coming out of college right now, it's a bad time. But the best part about it is that you can go to any place in the world and even in the country and still live at home or still live in Austin. So that's something to think about.
That's cool. Donovan, from a brand perspective, the brands that you work on, are you seeing them more invested in D&I or also taking a step back?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough time all around. I think there's the key issue with DEI is it's always important for everyone, but not always as urgent. And I think there's so many other things that feel very urgent right now that brands and agencies and companies alike are drawing their attention toward. And I think one of the most important things right now is how do you still maintain how do you still acknowledge the direness of everything that's happening in the world and in society while still maintaining the urgency. I'm like, no, we still got to fix this thing over here. And I think with brands, there's, we're entering Pride Month and there's probably going to be a lot of companies that are, making decisions. Do we want to spend money doing this thing for Pride or do we not? And the same with companies hiring. And I think it's up to people in those communities to speak up. But more importantly, I think it is more so up to the people with the privilege and with who aren't necessarily carrying the burden of being in a particular community to still voice these things and make it urgent.
Yeah. Michael, are you seeing the tech industry still kind of interested in DE&I? How are we making sure that this young, diverse talent isn't forgotten in tech?
Sure. So at a high level, I would say yes, but it's definitely not for everyone. What I would say is that some tech companies are having a hard time coming with the reality that not all of their employees are starting on level one, right? They don't realize, they're starting to realize that there are some things that we want our employees to do, but unfortunately they can't, whether it's regarding their children, whether it's regarding their own access, what's recalling their own income levels, right? There's certain things and barriers that are preventing them from being the best employees. So I always give my hat out to ADP and letting me really understand human capital management, because now tech companies are realizing, oh wait, we can't just pay everybody and think that's going to solve all the problems. There are other things that we need to do from a company standpoint to make these employees feel valued. So much so I'm going to do a shameless plug that we actually have an event on Thursday that is really addressing what can ERGs, which are employee resource groups at these companies, what can they do during this time regarding their underrepresented communities? What does that look like? So I think tech companies are seeing the need to change, but they're not really sure how to start. And they're taking this time to really do the research and then implement new things to kind of move away from status quo. But I would say it's an easier conversation to have and harder to implement.
Yeah. Jay, working at Indeed, obviously you've probably seen some of the ups and downs of the, job openings and what's available out there. The students that are going out into the world right now, are you still seeing internships, entry-level positions? Is there a silver lining for these students and young people?
Yes and no, because I have had some mentees whose internships have no longer exist anymore. On the plus side though, what I've been encouraging young or fresh out of college students to do is a bit of what Nina said, create your own, and you have an opportunity to reach out again to mentors or even people at the company you were originally interning at, hey, we all know what's going on, but I'm really interested in learning how to, insert the blank. Do you have any projects that I could work on? Even if it isn't under the company's name, it still gives me a way to build my portfolio. So I feel like the silver lining in this is it's just going to take a bit of finesse and a lot of workarounds and a real hustle mentality. If you really want something, make those connections. If you've already received an offer and they had to rescind it, stay in contact with that person that sent out that acceptance letter. Hey, I know that you're rescinding this offer, but what can I do? Or is there anything, in this time that I can do? And I've had some mentees even work on COVID related products because that company, they didn't have the money to have interns, and they're having their employees create different products and different responses. And now they have this thing that, students can still work on and build a portfolio.
That's great. Nina, what role are the higher education places kind of playing in all of this? How can they help, or what are they doing?
Yeah, I think on, the top down, everyone is mindful of how COVID has further shown the disparities. Not all student experiences are the same. And we're hearing stories about that across the country. At least I can speak to my program. We are also very focused on this idea of we still need to have students, young professionals, move forward in their professional journey. And how can we do that at this time? So something that, shameless plug, I'm excited to promote is that the Launchpad at UT, we're launching a new program that will actually be opening up to all students called Project Forward. And the focus of Project Forward is a pilot program around how can we encourage more entrepreneurship thinking and hustle mindset when it comes to finding jobs. So we'll actually have a webinar boot camp series, but one of the topics is actually creating your own opportunities. How do you pitch your own work opportunities? Especially because nonprofits and social impact orgs have an even greater demand for talent, but less resources. So how can you reach out, almost learn freelance consulting skills and then create a short-term work project for yourself. So you're still able to gain that portfolio piece and experience and move forward.
Yeah, very similar to what Jay was saying. So I think, that's great advice for these people kind of trying to prepare for the future. And again, like you said, their experience might be slightly different. One thing you said, Kuria, was in life and work, you teach people how to treat you, which I thought was a really interesting thing to talk about, especially coming from your perspective. Could you talk a little bit about the context of that statement and how young people today can practice that as they go out into the workforce?
Yeah, you can only receive respect when you give respect. And I think that sometimes people could take that statement out of context in the sense that, if you don't treat me with a raise, or you don't treat me with a promotion, or you don't treat me in a certain way, then I need to teach you that that's what I deserve. No, what I really mean by that is, it is, for example, if you have a child, or a obligation that's outside of work that cannot be changed, you have to first talk to your boss, tell them what the situation is, and most people, if it's reasonable, will work with you. What I mean by that is, as you grow in your career, sometimes what happens is you say, okay, I'm going to answer that email at 10 o'clock at night. Oh, I'll answer this on the weekend. Oh, it's Christmas Day. Let me go ahead and answer that. And so when you keep creating what we call you creep into your own personal time, there comes a point where you can't grab that particular situation back. So it's not saying you're not treating me correctly. It's, I have these obligations. I have to pick up my child, or I have something at 5:30. I have to leave at a certain time, and just being very clear about that. So it happens to the best of us. And sometimes I would say that those who go over and above are the ones that end up moving forward, so there's a balance to that. But yes, you do have to make sure you create boundaries that respects the person that you're creating those boundaries with. Oh, I can't hear you, Anna.
Was going to happen at some point, and of course it happened to me. So the next thing I was going to talk about was this idea of networking. We've talked a lot about that. Right now, networking kind of looks like this. So the amazing people that are in our audience, we're not seeing their faces. They can't run up to us and ask a question. How do we continue to build community in this virtual world and really make connections that mean something as we're trying to hustle and build our careers? And I know that Jay, you do a lot of that. Donovan is part of AdColor. I know AdColor is an organization that's a big priority for them. So maybe let's start with Donovan. What is AdColor? And I know because I work at AdColor, but I'm going to let you talk about it. What is AdColor kind of doing to build community? And then Jay, you can talk a little bit about Indeed.
Yeah, so I think we're at this weird time where people have always been involved in these communities, whether it be your college organizations that you used to be involved in on campus, or organizations like AdColor, where we're sort of all around the country, but sort of moving toward the same cause. And I think it's been convenient and nice to be able to passively engage in community, because you know that you're all going to see each other at this date, so you don't really have to work to keep it together. And I think now we're at a place where we don't know when we'll be able to meet up, and so there takes a certain level of intention now to keep communities active, and a certain level of creativity on like creating reasons to all get on the phone, or to utilize the resources across the country. Like one thing that we're working on now is specifically for the AdColor community and sort of in service of diversity, just recognizing that right now a lot of companies are letting DEI things slide down the list and aren't necessarily prioritizing it right now. And so we're looking to create these groups where we pull together some different members of our community across the country and tap into them and see what they're doing at their respective companies, or what's worked in the past, and see like, can we figure out ways to package that up and get that out to companies to make it super easy right now to plug and play some of these solutions. So I think it's just a matter of being more mindful and being aware of the times, but still maintaining your same priorities.
Yeah. Jay, any thoughts on networking in the virtual world?
I think right now, if you're a young professional already at a company, a really great thing to do right now is to reach out to people that you work with who are maybe in positions or have skills that you would want to gain over this time. And as far as like outside of work, I believe in just starting with the people that you know. So I've been trying to learn to code. So I've been reaching out to friends that I know who can code and send me like a curriculum, or like, hey, I've been thinking about, like, I just want to know some marketing stuff. Like, oh, I have a friend that's in marketing, so I'm just going to use this time to upskill. It does suck. Like you said, like, you can't really run up to people after an event. But the plus is for us introverts, this is a great time to just, reach out to people on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, however you feel comfortable. Like, this could also be a win because you can just like create this bio template and you kind of blast it out intentionally. So those would be like my two biggest pieces of advice. Like, if you're doing like a virtual event, our names are up now. So, if one of us says something that you're interested in, or we're part of an organization, you could just, reach out to us that way.
Yeah.
One quick thing to pile onto that. I know right now there's a lot of people on LinkedIn who are kind of sharing this copy and pasted message around. Like, if any of my friends or connections have been affected, like, hit me up. Like, look for those things and find them. And if you're in a position where you need some help, like, go out and seek that out and take people up on those offers.
Yeah. And I found myself too, finding ways to break out of my comfort zone. And Michael, you talk a lot about that, like this idea that you kind of follow the same path, you do what you think you're supposed to do, but getting people of color in tech is kind of this idea of breaking them out of their comfort zone and trying new things. How do you encourage that among the people that you work with?
Yeah, so that's kind of twofold. One is the employers, and then the other one is the end users, so like the students or the potential candidates, right? So from the employer standpoint, is constant interaction with them. It's really exposing them and sharing them what the reality is, because a lot of times we stay in our network, we stay in our environment without really going to the other side to seeing from their perspective. So really showing them, hey, these are some of the barriers that we are witnessing based on these data points, based on these trends, based on these surveys, right? Based on what we know, given the fact that we are interacting with these people on a daily basis. That's with the employers. With the students or professionals that are looking to enter the tech industry or just have a stronger foothold in the tech industry, I do things like this. I like speaking, I like engaging with individuals, I like sharing resources and opportunities for them to get into the tech space, and really let them know that through Autumn we have a whole ecosystem. You're never by yourself. This is a community. If you're looking for someone who is looking to either work on a project with you, you could do that by coming to an Autumn event. If you're looking for someone to just to meet, maybe you're just looking for a friend, you can do that through Autumn. If you're looking for a mentor, you could do that through Autumn. So regardless of where you are in the life cycle of your career or your overall lifestyle, you could find someone to network, to connect with, to allow you to get from point A to point B, whether that's looking for a job, mentoring, upskilling, whatever the case may be. We're providing those opportunities by being consistent. That's number one. You got to be consistent. You can't just do something one time and think you're going to solve the problem. You definitely got to be consistent. You got to over communicate. Be as transparent as you can be, so there's no confusions, nothing was misunderstood. And we always have to collaborate, because we are not by ourselves. You have to pull in more people that are doing the same work that you're doing in some shape or form to have that unified and that impact that you want to have.
Yeah, and I think that what you offer is so awesome and so interesting, because I was thinking to myself, like, these people that are going out into the workforce and trying to find a job, it's easy to get maybe a little desperate, and you're kind of like, I just need a job. But it's also a great time to pick a culture and an organization that is really truly going to nurture you and build you up and have some of that scaffolding to bring you to, the next phase in your career. And I'd love to, because this is not a question that we prepared for, so I apologize. But I was wondering, what are some ways that we can maybe tell our audience to use to identify what is a good place to work? What should I be looking for in an organization, in a company? What are some of the telltale signs of like, that's who I want to work for, especially when it's also virtual and you're not walking down the hallway, you're not seeing the people that you're working with, you're not feeling the culture the way you normally would if you were doing a face-to-face interview. And who knows when we'll be able to do face-to-face interviews again. And I know that we're all kind of speculating because we may not know the exact answer, but would love to hear your thoughts on that. And maybe we start with Nina and then we can go to you, Jay.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think especially right now during this pandemic, a lot of companies are showing their colors and how much they truly care about, the humans that are working for their organization. So just reaching out and learning more about how they're managing during this time, hey, what are you doing to keep your community or to keep your employees connected? Are you hosting happy hours? Are you just doing casual check-ins? What does that look like? With parents, like how are you managing, with employees who have young children, right? I think these are really great, like green flags or red flags, depending on what happens. Right. That can let you know that, hey, at least this is a company culture that cares about the human, especially right now. And I'm interested in learning more and seeing if the professional opportunity aligns as well.
That's great. Jay, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was gonna say exactly what Nina said, in a very small plug that on Indeed.com, that is a question that we are asking employers to answer is how are you responding to COVID to help job seekers see how a particular company is responding during this time. And I think for any young professionals it's really, really important to understand that the interview process is two ways. So it's not just about if, you're a good fit for the company, is the company a good fit for me? So while you're preparing your interview questions, you should think about like, what are my boundaries? Like what do I want to work all day? Do I want to be on call? Or what benefits are, important to me? And not just so much about like, the systems and the tools that the company is using. You need to see like, what's going to make me want to come to work every single day. So that's what I would point out. Like, remember, I know it's really hard when you're fresh out of college and you just want your first job, but you want to make that choice the right choice. So understand that just as much as they're interviewing you, you should go in with questions that you really care about. And COVID should definitely be one of those questions is, like how are they responding to this time?
Yep, absolutely.
If I can just quickly add on to that, that was so beautifully said. And that's something that I see with a lot of our students. When you're applying for a job, you're not a student, you're a young professional with existing skill sets, right? So that's really how you should frame your perspective coming into an interview. Like Jay said, it is really scary, but it's like dating. You don't want to come in desperate, right? Like you come in knowing your own value and what you're looking for out of this work relationship. And you can clearly communicate that.
Yeah, and having that confidence is really important, and I'm sure that can be intimidating and really hard, especially fresh out of school. Donovan, Kuria, Michael, any?
Yeah, I wanted to add something that we haven't talked about, which is being very focused on your communication with people. Because what happens after these panels, and I'm sure all of us have done many panels, we'll get tons of LinkedIn requests, and it's how can you help me? And I've not met you. I don't know where you live. I don't know what kind of degree you have. So being very purposeful in your communication to whoever you're speaking to is very helpful to them, because it's easier to say to a person, hey, I want you to review my resume and answer them versus someone else who would be, I just need help finding a job. And I don't know where to help or start with you and the 10 other people that have also reached out. So just being focused on what you want. And the other thing I would suggest is there's a tendency to always go to the same people. Like people will search, I mean, like for me, a diversity inclusion person, or they search for the recruiter. Take that opportunity to search for the people who actually have a job that you want. They are the ones that are part of the true decision-making process of getting you in the door. And so if you reach out to them with a solid question that they can actually answer, that will let you stand out beyond everyone else. The other thing I would also note, and especially since we're talking to the advertising community, I know for Austin, GSD&M and McGarrett-Jesse and other agencies are kind of where everybody wants to go. Whiting and Kennedy, maybe BBDO, that's more national where everybody wants to go. Why don't you take a look at the commercials you like or the work that you like and find out who's doing that work? Because it may be some small shop in Peoria that's doing all this great work,
Right.
and you get to tap into those people. So those are the pieces of advice I would share with people.
Great. Donald Scott, on one of the attendees, just mentioned that on the topic of interviews, you know, we also have this need to negotiate our initial salary. And right now, because again, there's a little bit of desperation, you know, it feels like the employer has a lot of the power. And oftentimes that first salary is a key indicator of what you'll be making in the future. You know, you have to kind of fight for that next raise. Any tips or thoughts on that? I know that's kind of specific, but yeah, that's definitely something that kids are going to have to be thinking about.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think, yes, we are in a pandemic, but there are other levers beyond financial that you can argue or make the case for, right? And that's really common with millennials. I was looking into some research about, you know, like, what do millennials and future generations care about, you know? So you can go into negotiation, be like, okay, you know, I understand we're in a pandemic. This is the salary you're offering. You know, what does flexibility look like? What does healthcare benefits look like? Are you providing free mental health resources? Like, what are the other things that are important to you? You know, are you paying for me to have upscaling opportunities and learning opportunities? And then you can assess that negotiation as a full package.
That's great. That's a good idea.
I'll chime in here. And what I would say on that front is do your research. Regardless of what they're offering you, make sure it corresponds with what you see in the market. And that's on a national setting, right? So not necessarily just Austin or where you are locally. That may be a different number versus what you see on a national scale. But definitely do your research to find out where those dollar points are. But then also realize what's your value, right? Just because it says, let's just say 50,000, if you believe you're 75,000, well then fine. Well, you're 75,000. It doesn't matter what the data points say. You at least have something to pull just to add. So you can say, hey, I know that the average for this position is X in these given areas. However, I'm asking for this because of these things. So you could definitely use that as an opportunity to add a value to what you're doing. And like what Nina said, there's definitely other options out there. I'm speaking from a tech standpoint. So there's definitely stock options. There's opportunities for them to pay for your schooling. They want to pay for your gym or housing or things like that, depending on the company. There's certain things they can do to add or increase your overall care package and what that looks like. But it always comes down to make sure you're doing research and you feel comfortable with having that conversation and practice. Actually practice what that conversation is going to be like. And that's going through, what are you going to say? What are they going to say? What's going to be their response? And make sure you have a good rebuttal. And that's something that we've done when we go through our sales process to make sure that we are prepared for any direction the conversation may go.
Yeah, that's great advice, Michael. Donovan, one of the things that Amani, another audience member, mentioned was that a red flag for her and something that happened to her at one job she took was that there were no people of color and only one in executive leadership at this agency. As someone who, works hard to push forward a lot of the initiatives at your own agency and just to elevate that conversation, how do people who are looking, they go to McGarrett-Jesse, how are you guys kind of making sure that this is something that permeates your culture that will be felt throughout the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a super good thing to look for, and I think has implications beyond what you would imagine. Like, I think it's more than just being able to have quick friends in an agency. I remember there was one, like when I was just starting out at my agency in Atlanta, I was kind of like fresh out of college, kind of nervous, was really quiet in meetings. And when I did talk, I wasn't super confident. And there was just this one meeting that a client meeting actually, where I remember it just like being super fluid and like easy. Like I was contributing, I was coming up with ideas, responding to the client. And it wasn't until after that I realized that was the first meeting I'd ever had where there were more Black people in the room than white people. And
Yeah.
so, and when you multiply that by every experience you have, and then to reverse that for people who have the privilege of constantly being surrounded by their culture or constantly being surrounded by people who look like them, there's a benefit that there's a boost that has that I don't think people acknowledge or address appropriately. And so yeah, and then taking that aside, I think there is just an advertising reality where you're going to be hard pressed to find an agency that is as colorful as you would like it to be.
Sure.
But I think a thing to concentrate on is how are they responding? Like, is this a thing? Like, you can kind of like when and I remember in past interviews where I would bring up, you know, how they engage with diversity and like how, and I think there's a pretty scripted, you know, oh, it's super important and we've got like, you know, we're on it, leadership is bought in, and you can kind of, that falls short pretty quickly. I think getting an understanding of how actually important and how urgent they are, and ask specific questions about what they're doing to address it. Like if you're in an interview at an agency that is 90% white, like, are they doing something about it, or are they not? Because there's actually there's a tweet going around, and it was old this morning. That was an old Angela Davis quote that was about there's a difference between being a non-racist and being an anti-racist. Right. And I think there's sort of non-racist where it's like, oh, like I'm not that thing. But there's a particular urgency and a particular pointedness that comes when you are anti-racist, when you have that disposition of I'm not comfortable until we get rid of this, or until we open up doors, or until we, and I think so much of that discomfort comes from the people who actually are Black and are other in spaces, and they have to sort of bear the emotional weight of not having a thing. And I think the more we can get that feeling and that urgency to spread to others is when agencies will start to feel better.
Yeah, going back to the—
chime in for 1 second on that, because Donovan, you touched on something I'm very passionate about, where I feel like, you know, majority of individuals are happy with the bare minimum. Like, they're happy with how things have been progressing thus far. And my response to that is, we have such a huge gap on this side. What you are doing is never going to be enough to actually offset that gap. We need to do things on a much amplified level, which is why there's certain companies that we don't work with. And the reason why is because they're just looking to hit a quota, you know, check off the box, but they're not doing anything to actually increase diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are three different things, not all one. Those are three different things that have three distinct different instances that target different individuals depending on where they are in your company. Because if I'm an employee, I'm really worried about inclusion. You know, that's my main thing. And we're talking about equity when you're first hired, right? There's certain aspects and certain pieces that have more value and more weight depending on where you are. But Donovan, I just wanted to comment on that because I'm a big believer that I know we have to start somewhere, but we can't be so quick to just stay at the starting line. I'm looking to get to the finish line. We got to move. We got to get forward.
Right.
And I know, Anna, you're going to be upset, but I'm going to add on to that people have to realize that within the advertising community, and I'm talking about African American at this point, there's only 5% Black in advertising. So even if we were to be on par with what is in based on the labor statistics, it's still less than half of the representative of the Black population in the United States. And Michael is completely correct. Diversity is just who you are. Inclusion is how we feel, how we make you feel about who you are. And equity is what opportunities do you get because of who you are. Those are all three different things. And because we put them all together constantly, people think we're only talking about who you are. And that is not it. Inclusion is really kind of the groundwork for diversity and equity, because if I don't care about you as a person, no matter who you are, I'm not going to give you opportunities. I'm definitely not going to let you in. So that's where it starts. I completely agree with you, Michael.
Yeah. And I know that not a lot of companies, most companies aren't super transparent about where they really honestly are in that process. And Jay, I was going to ask you, you talked a little bit about some of the questions that you ask companies that Indeed, are there metrics? Are there some companies that you see that are doing a really awesome job of being really transparent and you can tell that they're making efforts?
Yeah, so with me working in tech, I think when I first joined the tech field is when a lot of the tech companies started releasing their numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And even that was telling, like, which companies actually felt comfortable releasing their numbers.
Yeah.
And I know at Indeed, we have a ton of employee resources groups. So we have the Black Inclusion Group, we have iPride, the Asian Network. And when I first joined Indeed, I was like, like where's all the Black people, And so I kind of took it upon myself to get super involved because I didn't like what I saw at the time. And if you find yourself in a position where, like, I'm already at this company and I want there to be more, like, do what you can to make it if you have the bandwidth to do so. But at the time, it was something I was very passionate about. And I'm really grateful that I, went out and did this for myself. So that's part of how I was able to travel with the recruiting team. I'm personally not in our D&I department. I'm not even a recruiter. I'm not a sourcer. But I really, expressed how important this was to me and also how important it was for other people to see that I existed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always going to be some room for improvement. But especially in Austin, you can definitely start to connect your company with different organizations you're a part of, like Autumn, and then we have the Austin Area Urban League, where in Houston-Tillotson is also a great place that's doing a lot of great things. And so a lot of these companies do want to do something. They don't always know how, to go about doing those things. So if you can be that bridge and, like, hey, like, I'm just going to connect you with Michael at Autumn.
Right.
Y'all have lunch, y'all, share email and do what you need to do. But here's an organization because you've already expressed that there's something that you care about. And now I'm going to challenge, if you're going to step up and do what you said you thought was important.
Yeah, we all find a way of finding each other. I think everyone on this panel, we didn't all start out with D&I in our titles, but we all are here because we're so passionate about it. And I know, Jay, you wanted to bring up that in addition to DE&I, there's also this idea of psychological safety. Did you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so it's just something really big to me. So what psychological safety is diversity is important, equity is important, inclusion is important, but you have to create an environment where your employees feel comfortable being themselves, and you create an environment where you can make mistakes. And I feel like a lot of people of color already suffer from, like, imposter syndrome. And it doesn't matter if there's 10 Black people in a room, if you don't feel that safety, you still might, like, kind of fold or not feel as confident. So with a lot of these companies, when you are thinking about, diversity, equity, inclusion, like, okay, well, are we creating a space where people of color are going to feel comfortable being themselves? And I think about that a lot because, like, I have locks. And so, there's been a lot of things in the news about not being able to graduate because, like, this person has locks, or, oh, like, am I going to get this job because I can't, I have my natural hair. So that's something that people need to think about, like, push diversity, push inclusion, but make sure you have an environment where your employees feel safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add a point to that, I think getting to a place where you aren't being yourself happens so subtly, especially coming straight out of school where you're, like, the corporate environment is foreign. So you're getting into that first job and you're looking around to see what's normal. And if you're in a space with a bunch of people who don't come from your background and don't look like you and have their own set of norms, it can be very easy to feel like, oh, that's how people talk, or like, oh, that's how people, these are the kind of references that people include in presentations, and that to be seen as normal. But, like, no, that's just their version of normal. And so I think getting to the point where you're I think it's important to find ways to infuse your particular self and your background into your work. And I think it's a little bit easier in the creative field, where in advertising with strategy and creative, but I think with whatever you do, finding ways to learn the norms and learn what the norms are for people around you, but don't mistake people's norms for what corporate culture is all about.
Yeah. That's a good point. I grew up in Hispanic advertising, you know, in a multicultural agency where everyone looked like, well, actually, I'm not a typical Hispanic looking lady, so nobody looked like me, but they all spoke Spanish and we all kind of came from the same culture. And I felt like I could really, truly bring my culture to work. And then I started my first job at a general market agency. And you're right, Donovan, it's so subtle. Like I found myself, you know, just being a little more quiet, and now I have to dress a little more hippie because now I'm in Austin and I work at a hippie agency. And so you do find yourself kind of toning down who you are a bit. And it took a minute to be like, no, like I'm just gonna show up and they'll deal with it. And but it takes, you know, a lot of, even at my age and seniority, like it's easy for it to happen. So good point.
So I'll talk on that because that's one of the reasons why I decided to leave corporate America and actually turned Autumn into a nonprofit. Because at the time, I realized that this was a great opportunity. Loved working at Oracle. At the time, I was at ADP. But overall, loved everything about corporate America. Honestly, I do. I learned so much experiences. However, there were so many internal barriers that are preventing more people who look like me to get in the door. So by me leaving the corporate American realm, I wanted to be the bridge to connect more individuals saying, hey, you could do this too. Like, it's okay. It's not as hard as people may seem. This is the way for you to do that. But I think the challenge is that we just don't talk enough. We don't communicate enough to share those stories, which is why one of our programs is Autumn Horizons, where we connect students, K through 12 in college, see what it's like to navigate this tech industry. Whether you're technical or non-technical, it doesn't matter, but your story and your journey may be very different than someone who's just starting out. So having an opportunity to share that empowers people to make that decision to say, okay, I know if I'm going to go in corporate America, I at least have the foundation needed to be successful. And then to Donald's point about culture called ATX, so I also have a podcast, and in our podcast, we travel around Austin. This is pre-COVID. We travel around Austin to get different perspectives of individuals around different topics. So we've done education, we've done race, we've done real estate, we've done gun reform, we've done homelessness, anything that's controversial, to get people talking and hear different viewpoints. Because the moment you hear different viewpoints, now you could bring that perspective wherever you go, so you could see how to best navigate, regardless of what the situation is or what the environment looks like, because you've done some type of preliminary research and you've had the opportunity to exchange those cultures and those ideas and what that looks like.
Yeah. And Nina, I know a lot of the work that you do outside of your day job is kind of giving a platform to different voices and making sure that some of these different perspectives are heard. Can you talk a little bit about that work that you do and why that's important to you?
Yeah, so this goes back to this idea of, you know, building what you want to see in the world. So when I graduated UT and entered, you know, startup life, one woman marketing department for a startup, myself and my friends, we realized, you know, we're not really finding a community of creatives of color in Austin. We're not really finding the right friends, people to collaborate with, to connect with, and just support each other. So what can we do? So my friend group, we just threw a bunch of things at the wall, and it only took us about a year to figure out what we did really well, which were two things. It was digital storytelling and event production. So that was the origin story of Collective Blue. So since 2017, we've produced, you know, vendor markets, music showcases, speaker series on topics like adulting sucks, right? And how to navigate, you know, when your career and your life doesn't unfold the way you plan to. And in doing that work, it was interesting of just advocating for more people of color in the space of entrepreneurship and the arts. I realized that my own, you know, racial identity was brought up, where it was like, oh, like Asian women are like great nurses, right? Like, what are you doing as an entrepreneur, as a creative? And so my co-founder for Collective Blue, who's also Asian American, also immigrant, we sat on this idea for a while, and eventually we met our third co-founder, and we're like, you know what, let's just celebrate Asian American women, you know, that are in these spaces. What can we do? And so we decided to produce an annual festival called Misfits Fest, MISSFITS, around, you know, this idea of just showing a greater spectrum of what it can mean to be a self-identifying Asian American women. So from that, our first festival was last February at Native Hostel. It was like 300 plus people.
That's
when that
awesome.
was still a thing, you know. And we had, you know, yeah. Oh, Donovan was there. We had, you know, we had really just great speaker talk panels that I wanted for myself, like how to tell your parents you're not a doctor, engineer, lawyer, pursuing a creative career, right? Or like to all the Asians I haven't seen about media representation.
Yeah.
Or memoirs of a Big Asian, sexuality and gender identity, you know, in the Asian community. We had, you know, live music, you know, poetry, like craft vendors, food vendors, and from that it really evolved into additional micro events focused around the Asian American community.
That's awesome. I know Korea, GSD&M just recently had kind of a panel based on kind of the Asian American experience in COVID and all of that. How are you finding these conversations important? Like, how are they impacting the culture at GSD&M and bringing people together?
Yeah, so it's Asian Pacific Islander American Heritage Month, APAHM. And, you know, I hate that we have to dedicate a month for anything, but it is a time to kind of revisit a certain culture or community within our society. And this particular one was called the Kung Flu Effect. We talked about how the conversation around the Wuhan virus, derogatory terms that have been used recently, creating a lot of xenophobic activities. We're even hearing more today against the Black community, that it's kind of raising the bar of unfortunate racist behavior within our society. And we as makers, whether it's tech or it's advertising, have the ability to change the narrative. And so my job is to inform my coworkers about what a different perspective means and bringing forth what is valuable and good for them. Because when they're making commercials, I know that sounds so simple, who you put in the commercials, even in the background, or what kind of words you use, make a huge difference on how that brand is perceived. Had missteps, and so having these types of programs to inform them that this type of behavior is not good will allow us to put out much better work.
Yeah, no, definitely. I want to pause just for a second to see if any of our audience members have any questions. Feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we can try to answer them live. If not, I know Chris has a question.
Hello, I'm back.
Hi.
Yeah, you know, I do have one question. It's actually from a discussion earlier on, and it's really interesting. You know, I think generally when we cover this topic, we talk about how do we change the people within the agency, the creatives making these advertising, how do we make that more inclusive and representative of society, which is clearly very important. But someone had asked, you know, and I'm curious, what efforts do some of your companies make to, or if there are any, you can share, to hire diversity, or not diversity, but like multiculturally run vendors and organizations. So some of those smaller companies that already exist that maybe we can be building up by, you know, opening up business opportunities for them.
At GSD&M, we do have a vendor supplier diversity director. His name is Max Rutherford. He's fantastic, has been there for several years. And what happens behind the scenes are twofold. Unfortunately, some of the things that have happened when it comes to vendor supplier diversity is that people who, let's say, for example, someone might be married to a woman. And so in order to get the points, they made their wife 51% owner of the business. And so that has been a challenge in what we have as numbers. You never want to earmark things, but sometimes you have to do those things in order to get folks in the door. The other aspect is that when you get to a certain level, having the opportunity to have the skill set to deliver the type of production or production value that is needed for that commercial for us, you have to have years and years of experience, and in some case, millions of dollars of insurance. And so that kind of, not too many small businesses can afford that. So what we have done is basically we've worked with our clients to create campaigns that are focused on allowing people who are either women-owned or diverse-owned to come in and be able to be a part of it. There's free the bid, or now free the work that they're talking about, where they're expanding it to beyond female directors. But the challenge again is that none of these people own the business. So you have to we might have to think about how we see freelancing and freelancing with people who own the business as maybe two different goals that we're trying to achieve, because there's a lot of people out there who are freelancing who don't want to own their own business.
Okay. I do have a question from the audience. Joshua Foster asks, how do we tackle diversifying hiring managers in the industry? In my experience thus far, I'm always met with great D&I leaders and then make it to the final phase with the hiring manager, and it's never anyone that looks like me. After so many no's and hearing I'm not the right fit, it begins to feel like it's not about my experience level anymore. I see Jay. You want to talk, Jay? Or no? Anybody?
I don't know if I have a solid answer here, but I think that is one area where the tech industry can improve a lot. You'll find that in those higher positions in tech, that's when the representation starts to get lower and lower. I don't know if I have any solid advice. I think that responsibility is on like a top-down level.
Yep.
Where like your senior leaderships and the hiring managers on that level needs to do a better job at even promoting people within their organization.
Yep.
Yeah. So, go ahead, Donovan. So I would say it's twofold, right? One is I'm a big believer in empowering employee resource groups and empowering employee resource groups to think about themselves as a business resource group. So when I was leading Oracle's employee resource group for their Black employees, I was overseeing 14 different locations, all in North America, some in Canada, we had one in Brazil, which I was very excited about, but the rest was in the United States. And everybody had different experiences, different values, different cities, right, different regions, but we were still responsible for recruiting more Black people, making sure the Black people are staying and happy at Oracle, and they have upward mobility internally. So if we are not galvanizing ourselves and ensuring that we are being the voice to promote ourselves, so we are moving from entry-level roles to mid-level to senior level, so we have different touch points in between, we are never going to see the real change that we want. So I always push it back on, we need to empower people who are in these companies to be their voices for others, so more of us to get in the door. Because if we don't, then we're going to continue have the, I'm not the right fit, or you didn't meet the right qualifications. But if you have that network and you have that unification, then you'll be able to overcome that and get to the next step. But it's not going to happen overnight. This is a process that we need to start in order to get there.
Yeah, and someone here in the audience also kind of tacked on to that, this idea of like, is there a way to alleviate unconscious bias within interviews so that people stop hiring who they want to hang out with? And I think, what we're hearing is, there's no set answer just yet. It's a process. It's things that we're working on. I think some of the training, like what Curry is doing at GSD&M, and just being more aware of that bias is huge. I mean, step one is admitting that bias exists, so that you can consciously overcome it.
Yeah, and if I could speak to that really quickly, I think I think a lot of that has to do with companies being very mindful about the interview process and what happens there. Because I think to Joshua's situation where you get to the final round and this person is coming from this perspective of like, is this person a great fit? And I think the issue that a lot of people of color and all diverse communities face is when you're sitting in front of a hiring manager who's not from your background. It's not just that you're coming from different communities. It's this social distance where it's much more difficult to have conversations where it just feels natural, or you're coming from the same reference points, or like I think and I think agencies and companies tend to rely on these unstructured interviews where it's just you sit down and sort of manage. Confident is like, I can suss out what I need to, like just have a casual conversation. And those conversations tend to favor people who can communicate more easily with people who are just like them. And so one just sort of system adjustment is making sure you're asking candidates the same questions. Maybe it's not standardized throughout, but there's a bunch of research that Google did and some others that have done about how unstructured interviews leave so much room for bias, because you're just like, oh, like, could I grab a beer with this person, and sussing out their vibe versus getting to the same critical questions for each candidate. And one thing that someone who used to work at our agency brought up that I think was really clarifying for me is rather than asking, are they a good fit, starting from a place of do I respect them, and do they add value somewhere that we don't have it? I think if you just flip the orientation from do they fit into what we have to do they add something we don't have, that's great in favor of people who are coming from diverse communities.
That's great.
And I just wanted to add one more thing, is that we're implementing, we started doing this during the interview process. To Donovan's point, you sit in a room and you have face after face asking you questions. We're now creating kind of respite moments where myself or someone who is from a different perspective coming in, and all we do is chat. It's not about the job. It's just giving them a moment to recharge before they have to go on to the next round of interviews. It kind of gives them an idea. This is when they can, ask questions that they wouldn't normally ask in an interview, and also give them the opportunity to just walk around and, get something to drink or not feel the pressure of being in an interview process. So we started doing that. But going back to the question of how do we get more people in the door, you have to look at the numbers, and you have to show the management the numbers and say, can you explain why you have more women than men in some cases, or how come everybody's from UT in another case, or it's not always race and ethnicity. There's a lot of reasons why a department develops the way that it does, and so bringing out those elements to them will help them be able to course correct when they hire new people.
Yeah. Moving to another question here from the audience. Once you get that job and, you're doing a great job, but you often have to deal with microaggressions or covert racism early in your career. What's the right move? Do you go to HR? How do you handle that?
Or late in your career? No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Unfortunately, yes. But how do I handle that, Kurya?
I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to, that's not funny. It's really challenging because most times when microaggressions happen, it's just the two of you. And so it becomes a he say, she say. But I will say this, that when there are people who fall into this category, they don't tend to just target one person. There tends to be more and more examples. So to your point, Anna, sharing that with HR, whether it be on the talent side or the human resources side, is a way to kind of build the case, even if you feel like you may not be the nail in the coffin, because you'll be surprised that they do this to a lot of people in a lot of different ways. So if you're Black, they may do it to a woman as well.
Right. Well, and I actually have a personal experience with, I won't name names or get into specifics, but I encountered a not so subtle microaggression at work, and I brushed it off. I was like, what, I'm just not even going to deal with that. Cause you get used to it, being told, speak English, this is America, like, whatever, used to it. Come to find out later, this person was saying similar things and worse things to others, and somebody finally stood up for themselves, and I felt real bad that it wasn't me. And, you know, just totally honest and vulnerable with y'all here. Like, it's a moment where you're kind of like, man, I should have said something. So that might even be an interesting transition to this next question, which is more from the ally point of view. How can allies find that balance of being an aggressive and vocal advocate for DEI, but also not taking up too much space from diverse communities within an organization? You know, still giving the diverse communities their platform, their voice. What is the right balance of, you know, I'm with you, let's raise up, and still giving that voice, that ownership to the communities, the diverse communities?
Yeah, like if I could jump in, I think there was something interesting that you know, when Obama was campaigning in his sort of campaign offices, there were the women who were part of the campaign kept getting frustrated that like men were cutting them off, and like it's a sort of a tale as old as time. And they developed this rule. I can't remember what it was called, but essentially, like when one woman would spot that was happening, the other woman would sort of double back, and like it wouldn't need to be the person who was having the thing inflicted upon them being the aggressor. There were to be another person to step in. And the more that sort of thinking can expand, not just among people who occupy the same status, but also among men and white people and that sort of thing, where if you see these microaggressions happening to someone, being that voice to speak to something directly. But in to the point about not stepping, you know, too far, I think a lot of that just is about recognizing moments when you should be a contributor, but not necessarily a leader of a thing. Like, for instance, you know, a Black History Month programming during Black History Month, you have Black people who are putting together something. You know, the decision makers shouldn't be the white leadership. Decision makers of what we do, what happens, should be the people who belong to that community and with input from others. But I think in the same way that, you know, for Women's History Month, you wouldn't filter those ideas through men. So I think it's being able to pinpoint moments when your voice is needed because someone else is maybe uncomfortable, or it just comes, it holds more weight with yours, but also knowing when, like, hey, like, I can contribute, but I shouldn't be at the helm of this thing.
Yeah, that's a really
I can contribute to that. I have a really great example of just allyship. So my entire department, everyone is white and has grandkids. So there's a huge intergenerational and racial, just a lot of difference, right? But I love my team, and I've really thrived in this environment. And that's because of psychological safety and the great allyship that I've experienced. You know, my boss is like a 62-year-old white man, and he has done an amazing job of creating space and psychological safety. You know, even coming, and I'm traumatized from past, like, I left my first job because I was like, can't do this anymore, like, you know, and so rebounding from that trauma, I'm like, I can't work for anyone else ever again. I'm going to be super thorough in how I vet future employers. So even our initial conversation with my now boss, I was like, you know, like, I bring a very specific agenda to this type of entrepreneurship programming on campus. You understand my background, you know, and I pointed out, you know, the current startup mentors, you know, X% are men, are white, are from technology backgrounds. What message is that giving to, what is that message conveying to our students about what it means to be an entrepreneur, right? And he was receptive of everything, of the negative, well, you know, room for improvement feedback, you know, and he really gave me authority to build the programming that I wanted to see. So I think going back to someone who is like, I don't see anyone who looks like me, don't feel frustrated, don't give up. There are really great allies out there that will help you, and don't always make the assumption that because this person is a 60-year-old white male with, you know, grandkids, he's not going to understand my perspective.
That's awesome. We have time for one more question, and I'm going to let each of you answer it. with kind of your one thing. So one of the things I've struggled with, this is what Amar is saying. He says, one of the things I've struggled with is finding resources that provide actionable content for people interested in learning about D&I to engage with and consequently diffuse. Do you have any websites, articles, books, etc. that you'd be willing to share? So each of you give me your one resource, whether it's a website, article, book, that our audience should look to for how to engage and diffuse D&I actionable items or information. I'll start with Jay.
Yeah, I'm not gonna steal the shine from Michael, but I was gonna say I just subscribe to different organizations in Austin, or like Blacks in Tech or Afro Tech, and they do a pretty good job at sending content regularly, so I don't have to like really dig for it. So I would just start with different orgs and see if they have an emailing list, because in addition to events, a lot of times they'll send like, hey, this is another event that's going on, here's an article that came out or a link to a podcast, and that saves me a lot of time because I just like flag the emails and put them in their own little folder, and I'll go back and see what content they got together.
Awesome. Nina?
I feel like I follow so many different ones, and it's probably like Asian American oriented, but
There might be some Asian Americans. Tell us which ones.
Yeah, In Bold Company, Misfits, Plug, The Cosmos, Slanted Magazine. I know the Asian American Resource Center in Austin is trying to develop a lot more programming too. But I would just say just find what you're interested in, if there's specific intersectionalities of the communities that you want to engage with. And everyone in these spaces are so passionate that there's always something out there. Great.
Korea?
I have to agree. There's so many resources, but I'm going to go in a different direction. A good friend of ours, Anna knows him as well, Doug Melville. He's the senior vice president of TBWA, and he does a LinkedIn live broadcast every day called Diversity Doug. So if you want to learn all about diversity, go to Diversity Doug. In fact, he's got a lot of them still on LinkedIn, and you can go and listen to some of them in the past. He talks about brands and how they got to where they are when it comes to diversity. He'll talk about topics in relation to what's happening in the news. I think it's just a fun, quick way of getting up to speed on diversity, and that would be probably my recommendation right now.
Yeah, he is fun. Doug is a personality for sure. Michael?
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to shout out Autumn. So we have a weekly newsletter that we promote events that we're doing, events that other individuals and other organizations in the community are putting on. But then we also promote thought leadership around either technology trends or diversity, equity, inclusion, like the McKinsey study they recently done, like the one that UT Austin did around the education, the digital divide. So we're always pushing out good content in that regard. For training, I would promote the Undoing Racism workshop that the city of Austin has. There's also Beyond Diversity and also Courageous Conversations. Three of them are very similar, but yet it's very different. So depending on your focus, I've done Undoing Racism. That's one that I like the most, but to each his own. So I just put the link for our newsletters. If you want to sign up for that, you could do that. And then I'll type up the ones I just stated so you can look at those as well.
Awesome. Donovan?
Yeah, well, just want to chime in. The Courageous Conversations is great. Like I went to jump with them, and they're just really good at what they do. But I would say mine is maybe more specific to people invested in sort of adjusting how the agency operates. I think a lot of the diversity efforts are focused on getting people to understand a new thing, and like, you know, here's like an enlightening moment that you can see that, and I think that's important. But in terms of adjustment, I tend to look toward places like, you know, HBR has a lot of studies that are just like, here's just what the facts are, and here's the consequences if you don't change. Google has a thing that's all about the interview process and how like they ran this model basically saying like how a slight bias in annual reviews toward men, how that amplifies over time, and that like ultimately you're going to have movement in leadership. And Facebook also has like a really good, they have like, it's like a 2-part series of on unconscious bias that's like available to anyone. But yeah, just looking toward those places that are not necessarily talking about how a person can come to see this issue more deeply, and more about like how you can actually make adjustments to your company.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all the panelists for your words of wisdom and all that you do in our communities. I'm going to turn it over to Chris to close us out.
Yes, thank you so much for everyone who joined us. And again, Jay, Nina, Donovan, Anna, Michael, Kyria, thank you so much. This has been so beneficial, and I feel like I've got so many notes I'm just so excited to take back to my team and coworkers. I really appreciate y'all donating your time, and a huge shout out as well to our diversity co-chair Crystal, who largely put this together. So thank you so much, Crystal, and Katie, our other co-chair who's attending.
Yes, this has been a pleasure. And just to let all attendees know that I've dropped down names and titles of our panelists, as well as some of their social handles. So please feel free to follow them, reach out to them, take the hints that they gave y'all throughout the time of this conversation, and use it for your advantage. Yeah, one last thing I'd add on is, we will try to gather an organized list of, we mentioned so many great resources, which is enormous, because I know I always struggle to find a really good one. So I appreciate y'all giving all those plugs, but we'll see if we can put a list together and post it out on our social media. So if, in case you didn't jot all those down, follow us on social, give it a look next week, and we'll try and get those up for you guys. But again, thank you so much to all the panelists, attendees, our sponsor DJNR. This is really wonderful. So appreciate you guys taking the time. Right. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. So have a good day, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.